So get this, a Democratic socialist just won the mayoral race in America's largest city. But this story is so much bigger than just New York. Today we're going to unpack how this one single local election could signal a massive shift for the entire Democratic Party.
But really, can one city election actually change the future of a whole national party? That's the big question here, right? We're going to dig into one particular analysis that connects the dots from local policy all the way to a potential political earthquake on the national stage.
Okay, so first things first, let's talk about what just happened. New York City, a place pretty much synonymous with American capitalism, has just elected a Democratic Socialist mayor, Zoran Madani. And this is a huge win for the most progressive wing of the Democratic Party.
Now, this didn't just happen out of the blue. It's actually part of a very deliberate long-term strategy. The source we're looking at points out that the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, they often run their candidates on the Democratic Party line. It's a really smart move if you think about it, because it lets them tap into a much bigger voter base and win races that would be basically impossible for a third party.
Okay, so what does all this ideological talk actually look like on the ground, in terms of actual policies? Let's take a look at one of the new mayor's big ideas that's already making some serious waves.
Well, one of the biggest proposals on the table is this idea of city-run grocery stores. And the thinking behind it is pretty straightforward. Try to tackle the crazy high cost of living by offering food at lower prices. The plan is to bypass private companies altogether and make the basics more affordable for everybody.
But the analysis we're digging into says, hold on a second. It predicts this could set off a classic economic chain reaction. Step 1, the government comes in and forces prices way below what they'd normally be. Step 2, supply and demand get all out of whack. Everybody rushes to buy the cheap stuff, and suddenly the shelves are empty. And that leads to step 3, you get shortages, which create a perfect opening for a black market, where people can just buy up all the price-controlled stuff and sell it for a huge profit.
And look, this isn't just some abstract theory. The source points to some real-world examples. Just think about New York's super high cigarette taxes, which created this massive black market for smokes. Or look at California, where policies that were softer on low-level theft led to a huge spike in shoplifting. The argument here is that these kinds of government interventions, even if they're well-intentioned, often backfire in some pretty serious ways.
All right, to really get what's going on, we need to pull back from the specific policies for a minute and talk about the big ideas, the isms at play. The source we're examining makes a really sharp distinction between socialism and communism, so let's break that down. So, according to this particular analysis, socialism isn't the endgame. Instead, it's defined as the government system, the machinery, you could say, that's used to put communist ideals into action. And from this point of view, the focus is all about redistributing the wealth that's already out there, not necessarily on creating new wealth.
And this is where the distinction gets really interesting. In this view, socialism is the vehicle, right? The governmental process. But communism is the final destination, an ideology that, in its purest form, wants to get rid of the state completely. So, kind of a paradox here. According to this framework, the ultimate goal of communism is to actually destroy the very socialist state that was built to get there in the first place.
Okay, so here's where we get to a really, and I mean really controversial point from the source. It makes a comparison that focuses strictly on economic structure. The argument presented is that state interventionism, where the government gets heavily involved in the economy, shares structural similarities with the economic model used in Nazi Germany. Now, it's super important to be clear here. This is a comparison of economic models only, and it's explicitly separated from that regime's horrific racial ideology and atrocities. So all this brings up a pretty obvious question, right? If this expert's analysis says these systems have such a problematic track record, why on earth do they stick around? Why are they still so popular? Well, the argument here is that it's not really about the nitty-gritty economics, it's about the story. It's an emotional appeal. It offers a simple, powerful narrative. It sees a problem, like inequality, it names a villain, the evil billionaires, and it gives you a direct solution, take from the rich to give to others. And that kind of story can be way more compelling than talking about the complex, often slow process of creating new opportunities for everyone.
And that brings us to what might be the most important part of this whole thing. Because the argument is that this election isn't really about grocery stores. It's a symbol of a much, much bigger fight.
This win in New York is being seen as a major battle in the war for the very soul of the Democratic Party, a fight over what it stands for and where it's going next. And you can really see the two sides lining up. On one side, you've got the Democratic Socialists,
Think AOC, Bernie Sanders, who are pulling the party hard to the left. But on the other side, you've got the more traditional, old-school Democrats. And they're worried that this shift is going to scare away all those moderate, middle-of-the-road voters they absolutely need to win national elections.
And that right there is the fundamental problem they're facing. I mean, a political platform that gets you a win in a super progressive place like New York City could be a total disaster in a statewide election or a presidential race. The fear among those traditional Democrats is that these local wins could push the whole national brand way too far to the extreme.
So, after all that, all this national drama, this big ideological battle, it all comes back to this one election in one city.
Which leaves us with the big, final question. Is this New York City election the start of something new, a sign that one of America's big parties is headed for a full-on socialist future? Or is it a political dead end, a strategy that only works in its own little bubble and could actually sink the party on the national stage? The answer to that? Well, that's going to define American politics for a long time to come.